The pickaxe struck something that wasn't stone. Road crew foreman Dutch Mackenzie knelt in the muddy avalanche debris, brushing dirt from what looked like fabric. Blue wool, the kind mountain folk wore against the cold. Then he saw the small boot, still laced tight around bones white as winter snow. 20 feet deeper in the rockfall, his men found the second skeleton, curled in a corner of what had been a hidden cave. Between the brothers lay a leather satchel, perfectly preserved in the mountain's dry air. Inside, a journal written in a child's careful script. The final entry, dated October 15th, 1897, contained just 4 words that would haunt Burke County for generations. They're scratching the walls. Above the skeletons, fresh claw marks scored the limestone ceiling in parallel grooves, each one deeper than a man's fingers could reach. Something else had been in that cave. The Copper Creek Mining Company whistle shrieked across Burke County at exactly 6:15 a.m. on October 9th, 1897, calling men to another day of tearing silver from the Appalachian spine. Thomas and Samuel Hartwell, ages 12 and 10, heard it from their family's cabin a mile up the ridge. Their father, Isaac Hartwell, had already been in the tunnels since 4 that morning, swinging a pickaxe in the suffocating darkness 800 feet below ground. The boys had chores: feed the chickens, split kindling, check the rabbit snares their grandfather had taught them to set along the creek. But October mornings in the high country carried promises of adventure that no amount of parental warning could contain. The maples blazed scarlet against gray stone, and somewhere in those ridges, according to local Cherokee stories, old silver veins still waited for clever boys to find them. Samuel, the younger brother, possessed what mountain people called the sight, an uncanny ability to locate lost objects and sense trouble before it arrived. Thomas, 2 years older and practical as pine resin, served as the expedition leader. Together, they'd explored every creek, cave, and game trail within 5 miles of home. Their mother, Mary Hartwell, worried constantly about these wanderings, but their father understood. The mountains called to certain souls, and fighting that call only made it stronger. That morning, Samuel claimed he'd dreamed of silver coins scattered like fallen leaves across stone. The dream felt real enough to taste the metal on his tongue. Thomas listened with the patient skepticism of an older brother, but when Samuel pointed toward the unnamed peak locals called Widow's Crown, something stirred in his practical mind. The mountain seemed closer that day. Widow's Crown rose 3,000 feet above the valley floor, its limestone face scarred by centuries of storms and mining claims that had failed to pay out. Cherokee elders still remembered when their grandparents called it Envichi Golkalu, the place where things hide. Most Burke County families avoided the peak entirely, not from superstition, but from practical knowledge. The mountain's slopes were honeycombed with unstable caves and abandoned mine shafts that could swallow a man without warning. The Hartwell boys packed light: rope, candles, their grandfather's compass, and bread wrapped in cloth. They left at dawn, telling their neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, they'd be checking snares by Kettle Creek. The lie came easily. Adults never understood that some discoveries required disobedience. The climb took 2 hours through laurel thickets and over moss-slicked boulders. Samuel led them past 3 false trails, following instincts he couldn't explain. Thomas marked their path with broken twigs, a precaution their father had taught them. By 10 a.m., they'd reached an area neither boy had seen before, a natural amphitheater where the mountain's limestone ribs jutted from the earth like the skeleton of some buried giant. Samuel stopped beside a cleft in the rock face barely wide enough for a child's shoulders. Cool air flowed from the opening, carrying a scent Thomas couldn't identify. Not quite mineral, not quite earth, something else. "In here," Samuel whispered, though no one else was near enough to overhear. The older brother tested the opening with a candle flame. The light flickered but didn't die, meaning the cave had air. Thomas went first, crawling through the narrow passage for 20 feet before emerging into a chamber tall enough to stand upright. Samuel followed, bringing the rope and provisions. The cave stretched deeper than their candlelight could reach, its walls smooth as if carved by ancient waters. But it was the drawings that made both boys catch their breath. Figures painted in red ochre covered every surface. Hunters and animals in styles neither boy recognized. And everywhere among the painted beasts, the same symbol repeated. 4 parallel lines scratched deep into stone. Claw marks, fresh enough to smell of crushed limestone. Thomas held the candle higher, examining the nearest set of marks. Each groove was precisely spaced, as if made by talons the length of railroad spikes. The limestone dust at the base of each scratch still held the chalky white color of fresh stone. Whatever had made these marks had been in the cave recently. Very recently. Samuel touched one of the painted figures, a creature that looked like a bear walking on its hind legs. The ochre pigment flaked under his fingers, revealing older paintings beneath. Layer upon layer of images, as if generations of artists had worked in this hidden space. Some of the deepest paintings showed human figures, but their proportions were wrong. Too tall, arms too long, faces that seemed more suggestion than detail. "Samuel," Thomas called from deeper in the chamber. "Come see this." His younger brother followed the candlelight to where the cave curved sharply left. There, carved into a natural shelf in the wall, someone had left offerings, arrowheads, pottery shards, and 3 silver coins blackened with age. Spanish pieces, judging by the crosses etched into their faces. Samuel's dream had been accurate, but these coins weren't scattered. They'd been placed deliberately, arranged in a triangle around a 4th object neither boy recognized. A claw, ivory white and curved like a sickle, longer than Thomas's thumb. As Samuel reached for it, both boys heard the sound that would haunt their final days. Somewhere in the depths of the cave system, stone scraped against stone. Rhythmic, purposeful, like something large dragging itself across the floor. The sound echoed from multiple directions, making it impossible to locate the source. Then silence, so complete Thomas could hear his own heartbeat. The candle flame wavered, though no breeze stirred the air. In the dancing light, the painted figures seemed to move, hunters pursuing prey across walls that suddenly felt less like shelter and more like a trap. Samuel grabbed the ivory claw and stuffed it into his pocket without thinking. The scraping started again, closer this time. Both boys ran for the entrance, squeezing through the narrow passage so quickly, Thomas scraped his shoulders raw against the stone. They didn't stop running until they reached the tree line, where familiar bird song and normal daylight restored some measure of sanity. But when they looked back at Widow's Crown, something was watching them from the cave opening. Something too large to be human. Isaac Hartwell found his sons sitting by the cabin's cold fireplace when he returned from the mines that evening, still covered in silver dust and limestone grit. Both boys stared into the empty hearth as if seeing flames that weren't there. When their mother asked about their day, Thomas answered in single syllables while Samuel said nothing at all. Over supper, Isaac noticed his younger son clutching something in his left pocket. Fingers closed so tight the knuckles showed white. The boy had inherited his grandmother's Cherokee features: high cheekbones, dark eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Those eyes now held the particular brightness Isaac recognized from his own childhood encounters with mountain things that couldn't be explained. "You boys find anything interesting up by Kettle Creek?" Isaac asked, testing the lie Mrs. Abernathy had repeated. Thomas met his father's gaze directly. "No, sir, just empty snares." But Samuel's hand tightened on his hidden treasure, and Isaac caught the involuntary gesture. Whatever his boys had found, it wasn't at Kettle Creek. And whatever they'd found was still with them. That night, Isaac sat on the cabin's front porch, smoking his pipe and watching the mountains. Mary had gone to bed early, exhausted by a full day of washing and mending. Through the boy's bedroom window, he could hear whispered conversation punctuated by long silences. At 11 p.m., the whispering stopped, but Isaac remained outside until dawn. He'd grown up in these mountains. He knew the stories. The Cherokee elders spoke of the Kekla Kudla, creatures that lived in the deep places where sunlight never reached. Not quite bear, not quite man, but something between. Hunters older than the Cherokee themselves. Most tribes had similar stories. The Creek called them Esti Kapkaki. The Choctaw knew them as Nalusa Falaya. Different names for the same truth. The mountains kept their own counsel, and some things were better left undisturbed. The Copper Creek Mining Company operated 17 shafts on the eastern face of Widow's Crown, each one carved into the mountain's limestone heart with dynamite and manual labor. Superintendent Roland Hayes had worked these tunnels for 8 years, long enough to learn which veins paid out and which ones led to places miners didn't discuss. Shaft 17 had been sealed 3 months ago, after a team of diggers broke through into a natural cave system. The men reported finding bones scattered across the cavern floor. Animal remains, they claimed, though 2 workers quit that same day and left Burke County entirely. Hayes had ordered the tunnel closed with 2 tons of blasted rock, citing structural instability in his official report. The real reason lived in a locked drawer in Hayes's office, a sketch drawn by Tommy Morrison, one of the miners who'd entered the cave. The drawing showed claw marks in the stone, along with what Morrison described as man tracks, but wrong-sized. Morrison had been mining for 12 years and wasn't given to flights of imagination. When he sketched those tracks, his hands shook so badly the pencil lines wavered. Hayes had seen similar marks in other sealed shafts. Company policy was simple. When miners found evidence of the mountain's older residents, they backed away and found silver elsewhere. Copper Creek mining had operated profitably for 2 decades by respecting certain boundaries. But boundaries only worked when everyone observed them. On October 10th, Hayes received a report from his surface crew. Fresh slide marks on the sealed entrance to Shaft 17, as if something large had been testing the barrier. Small rocks scattered downslope, and in the mud beside the blocked tunnel, a single footprint that didn't match any boot worn by company men. The print was human in shape, but wrong in scale. Longer than a size 12 boot, wider across the toes, with claw marks extending beyond where normal nails would end. Hayes ordered additional rocks placed over the tunnel entrance and posted guards around the worksite. He didn't explain why guards were necessary, and his men didn't ask. Mountain folk understood that some questions carried dangerous answers. Samuel Hartwell stopped eating on October 12th. He sat at the breakfast table moving scrambled eggs around his plate while staring at the ivory claw he now carried openly in his palm. The artifact seemed to grow heavier each day, its surface warming to an uncomfortable temperature that made the boy's skin flush red where it touched. Thomas watched his brother's deterioration with growing alarm. Samuel had always been sensitive to things others couldn't perceive, but this was different. The younger boy spoke in whispers, claiming he could hear scratching sounds in the cabin walls. At night, he stood at the bedroom window, watching Widow's Crown as if expecting something to emerge from its shadowed slopes. Mary Hartwell called for Dr. Benjamin Carver, the circuit physician who served the mountain communities. Carver examined Samuel thoroughly, finding nothing wrong except elevated temperature and dilated pupils. When the doctor asked to see what the boy carried in his hand, Samuel closed his fist and shook his head violently. Mountain fever, Carver diagnosed, prescribing bed rest and willow bark tea. But privately, he told Isaac Hartwell the truth. Whatever afflicted the boy wasn't medical. Something was calling to Samuel, and the longer he resisted, the more it would pull. Dr. Carver had seen this condition once before, in a Cherokee child who'd found artifacts in a forbidden cave near the Tennessee border. That boy had wasted away over 3 weeks, speaking of voices only he could hear. The child's grandfather had finally taken him back to the cave where the artifacts belonged. The boy had emerged hours later, healthy but forever changed. He'd never spoken of what happened in those depths, but he'd lived to adulthood. The grandfather's advice had been simple. Some things choose their owners. Fighting the choice only makes the hunger stronger. October 13th brought the first snow to Widow's Crown's peak, 3 weeks earlier than normal. Samuel stood at the window before dawn, watching white flakes settle on limestone faces. In his palm, the ivory claw pulsed like a second heartbeat. "It wants to go home," he told Thomas in a voice that didn't sound entirely his own. His older brother understood. The claw wasn't just an artifact, it was an invitation, and refusing that invitation might kill Samuel slowly. Isaac Hartwell sat at his kitchen table after midnight on October 14th, cleaning his rifle with hands that trembled slightly. Mary had fallen into exhausted sleep, but Isaac remained awake, listening to Samuel's feverish murmurs from the next room. The boy's temperature had risen throughout the day, despite Dr. Carver's treatments. More disturbing, Samuel had begun speaking words that sounded like Cherokee but followed no grammar Isaac recognized. Thomas appeared in the kitchen doorway, fully dressed. "Pa, we have to take him back." "Back where, son?" "To the cave, where we found it." Thomas gestured toward Samuel's room. "He told me in Cherokee words I never heard before, said the mountains calling him home." Isaac set down the rifle and studied his older son's face. Thomas had always been practical, grounded in the everyday realities of mountain life. If the boy believed returning to Widow's Crown was necessary, then other options had been exhausted. "You know what stories they tell about that mountain?" "Yes, sir." "And you still think we should take your brother there?" Thomas met his father's eyes. "I think Samuel's dying, and that thing in his hand is the reason. Maybe taking it back is the only way to save him." Isaac had reached the same conclusion. Cherokee elders spoke of objects that bonded to specific bloodlines, artifacts that demanded completion of interrupted ceremonies. The Hartwell family carried Cherokee ancestry through Isaac's grandmother. If Samuel had disturbed something that recognized that heritage, normal medicine would prove useless. What would you do, faced with a choice between your child's life and an unknown danger? Isaac Hartwell chose his son. They would leave for Widow's Crown at first light. But as Isaac loaded cartridges into the rifle's chamber, he couldn't shake the feeling they were walking directly into a trap that had been waiting decades for exactly this moment. Some hunts, the Cherokee said, lasted generations. The prey thought they were living free until the final circle closed. Outside, snow continued falling on the mountain's peak, each flake carrying the scent of things long buried. Burke County Sheriff James Patterson received the missing persons report on October 16, 1897. Isaac Hartwell had failed to report for his mining shift, and his wife hadn't seen her husband or sons since dawn on October 15th. A neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, reported seeing the three males heading toward Widow's Crown before sunrise, armed and carrying provisions. Patterson assembled a search party of 6 men, including Superintendent Hayes from Copper Creek Mining. The group followed clear tracks through October snow, trailing the Hartwell's path up the mountain's eastern slope. The tracks led directly to the sealed cave system, where Samuel and Thomas had first encountered their doom. But the entrance they found wasn't the narrow cleft the boys had discovered. The searchers faced a gaping hole torn through limestone, as if something massive had burst outward from the mountain's interior. Rock debris scattered for 50 yards downslope, some boulders weighing hundreds of pounds. No natural force could have created such destruction. Inside the enlarged opening, Patterson's men found evidence of struggle: torn clothing, scattered provisions, and 3 sets of human footprints leading into the depths. But other tracks pressed into the cave floor told a more disturbing story. Prints that looked almost human but measured 18 inches from heel to toe, with claw marks extending beyond the toes. The searchers followed the trail for 300 yards before their torches began guttering in the thin air. The cave system branched in multiple directions, creating a labyrinth that could hide an army. But from the deepest tunnels, they heard sounds that stopped their pursuit: scraping, clicking, and what might have been human voices calling for help. Or might have been something else using human voices as bait. Patterson ordered the search party to retreat and seal the cave entrance. His official report listed the Hartwell family as lost in mountain terrain during early snowfall. The real details went into a locked file that wouldn't be opened for 40 years. But on October 17th, a Burke County postal clerk found a letter slipped under the door of the courthouse. Written in a child's careful hand, it contained a single page dated October 15th, 1897. They're scratching the walls. Samuel is better now, but Pa says we can't leave until it's finished. Tell Ma we're safe. Don't come looking. The letter was signed Thomas Hartwell, in handwriting that matched the boys' school assignments. No one could explain how it had reached the courthouse. Dutch Mackenzie's road crew found the journal 40 years later, preserved in the leather satchel clutched between Thomas Hartwell's skeletal fingers. The final entries, written in increasingly shaky handwriting, revealed what had transpired in those mountain depths during the family's final week. From the Journal of Thomas Hartwell, age 12, October 15th, 1897. We found Samuel in the big chamber, sitting with the old ones. They don't look like the cave paintings. Bigger, older. Their eyes shine in the dark like candles. Samuel is talking to them in words I can't understand, but Pa seems to know some of it. They want something. A trade, I think. Samuel for safe passage. Pa won't agree, says no parent gives up their child, no matter what's offered in return. October 16th. The way out is blocked, not by rocks, by them. They move the stones like children move marbles. We have water from the underground stream and food for 3 days. Samuel says they're not keeping us prisoner. They're keeping others out while they decide what to do with us. The old ones remember when people brought offerings, silver and meat and sometimes other things, payment for crossing their territory safely. Samuel carries something they want back, but taking it isn't enough. There has to be a choice. October 17th. Samuel is teaching me their words. He says I need to understand because I'm the older brother, and decisions like this run in bloodlines. The Cherokee part of our family made agreements with the old ones generations ago, promises that were never properly finished. October 18th. Pa tried to fight them today. They didn't hurt him, just held him until he calmed down. One of the old ones, the largest, spoke to him in perfect English. Said the boy could leave any time he wanted. All of us could. But if we left without completing the old agreement, other families would be called instead. Samuel says he won't let that happen. Says he can feel other children in Burke County starting to dream the dreams he dreamed. The calling spreads until someone answers. Pa is crying. I never seen him cry before. The largest of the old ones called himself the Keeper of Promises. Thomas wrote that he stood nearly 8 feet tall, his body covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb torchlight. His hands ended in claws like yellowed ivory, and his eyes held intelligence that predated human civilization by millennia. The keeper explained the agreement Thomas's Cherokee great-grandmother had made in 1842. Safe passage through the mountain territories for her descendants in exchange for periodic service. A child from each generation, chosen by the mountain spirits, would spend time learning the old ways. Most returned to their families after a season. A few, marked by special gifts, stayed longer. Samuel possessed the sight that made him valuable to the old ones. He could navigate between the human world and the deeper places where ancient things still hunted. With proper training, he could serve as an interpreter, helping maintain the boundary agreements that kept both sides safe. Without such interpreters, the boundaries dissolved. The old ones would be forced to reclaim their territories through more direct methods. And Burke County families would start losing children to hunting parties that left no tracks modern men could follow. Isaac Hartwell faced the choice his great-grandmother's promises had delayed for 2 generations. Give up one son to save all the children in Burke County, or fight a war against creatures that remembered when the Cherokee first crossed the mountain passes. October 19th, 1897. Samuel made the choice for all of us today. Told the keeper he would stay and learn, but only if Thomas and Pa could leave safely. The keeper agreed, but said the covenant required a witness from our bloodline. Someone who could return to the human world and explain why Samuel disappeared. Thomas would carry that burden. Pa is still trying to find another way, but Samuel shows me things now when I sleep. Other children in other counties starting to feel the pull Samuel felt. Dreams of silver and caves and voices calling their names. The old ones aren't cruel. They're just older than our understanding, and they remember promises people have forgotten. October 20th brought the final test. Samuel would demonstrate his ability to communicate with the old ones, proving he could serve as an effective interpreter. If he failed, the keeper would release the family but begin hunting other children immediately. If he succeeded, Thomas and Isaac would leave the mountain with instructions for maintaining the boundary agreements. Samuel's test took place in the deepest chamber, where the cave walls opened into a vast underground space carved by geological forces older than human memory. Thomas wrote that the chamber's ceiling disappeared beyond their torchlight, while the floor held pools of water that reflected no images. Around these pools, the old ones gathered. Thomas counted 13 figures, ranging in size from barely taller than himself to massive creatures whose shapes defied description. They communicated through sounds that blended clicks, growls, and harmonics that made Thomas's bones vibrate. Samuel walked among them without fear, his small hand resting on the ivory claw that had called him to this place. When the largest old one spoke, Samuel translated. He says the mountain remembers when the Cherokee first asked permission to cross. Your great-great-grandmother brought silver and promises. Her bloodline would provide interpreters when needed. The silver is long spent, but the promises remain. Isaac Hartwell listened to his 10-year-old son translate negotiations between worlds, watching childhood disappear from Samuel's face with each exchange. The boy was changing, becoming something between human and other. His eyes reflected light like the old one's eyes, and his movements carried a fluid grace that belonged to creatures who hunted in absolute darkness. The covenant was simple. Samuel would remain for 7 years, learning to speak for both sides when conflicts arose. After 7 years, he could choose to return to the human world or stay with the old ones permanently. In exchange, the creatures would honor the ancient boundaries, taking only those children who violated sacred spaces or carried the calling in their blood. Thomas would carry messages between the human settlements and the mountain, a sacred responsibility that could never be abandoned or shared. Isaac Hartwell agreed, because refusing meant watching Burke County's children vanish one by one until someone else made the same choice. October 21st. Samuel is different now. He moves like them and his eyes see things in the dark that I can't see. When he talks to me, his voice echoes even when we're in small spaces. The old ones are teaching him their language, but it's changing his human words too. Pa and I leave tomorrow. Samuel hugged me goodbye, but his skin felt cold as cave stone. He gave me a message for Ma. Tell her the mountain called, and he answered so others wouldn't have to. Tell her he'll be home when his work is finished. But I think he knows what I know. Home isn't a place anymore. Home is wherever the old ones go when summer ends. Thomas and Isaac Hartwell emerged from Widow's Crown on October 22nd, 1897, carrying a story that would fracture their family forever. Mary Hartwell listened to her husband's account with growing horror, refusing to accept that her youngest son had been sacrificed to maintain agreements she'd never heard of. The official story, told to Sheriff Patterson and repeated to neighbors, was simpler. Samuel had fallen into a sinkhole during the early snowstorm. The cave system was too unstable for recovery efforts. His body would remain in the mountain, buried by natural forces beyond human control. But Thomas carried the real burden. As the designated messenger between worlds, he was responsible for monitoring Burke County families for signs of the calling. Children who dreamed of silver coins and cave paintings. Children who wandered toward Widow's Crown without remembering why. When he found them, Thomas would have to guide them to a safe distance from the mountain's influence, or if the calling was too strong, help them understand what choice they faced. The ivory claw Samuel had carried remained in Thomas's possession, warming against his skin whenever the old ones needed to communicate. Through that artifact, he learned that Samuel was adapting well to his new responsibilities. The boy spent his days exploring the vast cave networks beneath multiple mountains, mapping territories and identifying potential conflicts between the old ones and expanding human settlements. But Samuel was also changing in ways that made return to human society increasingly unlikely. His body was growing to match his new environment, developing enhanced senses and physical capabilities suited for life in absolute darkness. His mind was learning to think in time frames measured by geological epochs rather than human lifespans. By the end of Samuel's first year with the old ones, Thomas understood his brother had become something else entirely. Something that remembered being human, but could never truly be human again. The 7-year agreement was a kindness, allowing families to hope for reunions that would never come. October 22nd, 1898. 1 year since we left Samuel on the mountain, Thomas writes in his journal every day, trying to record what only he remembers clearly. Pa doesn't talk about it anymore. Ma still sets a place at supper for Samuel, still watches the mountain path like she expects him to come home. I know he won't come home. The claw tells me things about where he is now, the deep places where the old ones live. Samuel is learning to hunt with them, learning to move through stone like it was water, learning to see the connections between all the cave systems from Tennessee to Georgia. He's becoming their voice in the deep places, and they're becoming his family in ways we could never be. But sometimes, when the wind blows down from Widow's Crown, I hear him calling my name, not asking for rescue, just saying goodbye, over and over, like he's trying to let me know it's all right to stop listening. I don't know if I can. Thomas Hartwell lived to age 87, carrying his brother's secret through 8 decades of Burke County history. He married, raised 4 children, and worked as a surveyor mapping mountain territories for logging companies. His maps contained notations that other surveyors didn't understand, warnings about certain caves, recommendations to avoid specific ridges, boundary markers that corresponded to no human property lines. The ivory claw remained with him until his death in 1962, passed down through generations of Hartwell, descendants who inherited the responsibility of monitoring the mountain's ancient agreements. Each carrier learned to recognize the signs of calling in local children, gently steering them away from Widow's Crown during periods when the old ones grew restless. But the agreements were breaking down. Modern mining equipment could penetrate deeper into the mountain than pickaxes and black powder. Logging operations cleared entire ridges, eliminating the forest barriers that had traditionally marked sacred boundaries. Most dangerous of all, children no longer grew up with stories that taught them which places demanded respect and which paths led to territories better left unexplored. The old ones adapted to changing times, but their patience wasn't infinite. Thomas's grandson, Robert Hartwell, inherited the claw in 1962, along with increasingly urgent messages from the deep places. Survey crews were breaking through into protected cave systems. Mining operations were disrupting underground territories, and the old ones were running out of places to retreat. Samuel, after 65 years in the mountain, had become something that could barely remember its human origins. Through the ivory claw, he sent warnings that sounded less like words and more like geological processes. Rumbles that spoke of patience ending, of ancient hunts resuming, of children being called not for service, but for feeding. The 7-year agreement had lasted decades through Samuel's willing sacrifice, but nothing willing about what was coming next. By 1975, the Hartwell family faced the same choice their ancestors had confronted: find another child to offer the old ones, or watch Burke County's children begin disappearing in ways that would draw unwanted attention from state and federal authorities. Robert Hartwell had 3 sons. The oldest, Michael, showed signs of the sight. The cycle was preparing to repeat. The landslide of March 22, 1998, was triggered by an unusually severe spring storm that dumped 6 inches of rain on snow-saturated ground. The resulting debris flow carved a new channel down Widow's Crown's eastern face, exposing cave systems that had remained hidden for over a century. Dutch Mackenzie's road crew, working to clear State Route 47, discovered the first skeleton on March 23rd. The remains lay in what had been a small cave chamber, now split open by the landslide's force. Coroner's examination revealed the bones belonged to a male child, approximately 12 years old, who had died sometime in the late 19th century. The second skeleton was found 20 feet deeper in the exposed cave system. Also a child, younger than the first, curled in a defensive position with arms wrapped around a leather satchel. Both skeletons showed no signs of trauma or violence. They appeared to have died from dehydration or starvation, as if trapped in the cave by some catastrophic event. But the Siamchipkyo cave walls told a different story. Fresh claw marks scored the limestone in patterns too deliberate to be random. Parallel grooves, each set precisely spaced, covered every surface within reach of the skeletons. Some marks appeared ancient, worn smooth by decades of exposure. Others looked recent enough to have been made within days of the discovery. The leather satchel contained Thomas Hartwell's journal, along with personal effects that confirmed the skeletons' identities. Burke County records showed both boys as missing since October 1897. Their father, Isaac Hartwell, had also vanished during the same period and was never found. Dr. Margaret Chen, the forensic anthropologist brought in from the University of Georgia, spent 2 weeks examining the site. Her official report focused on the historical significance of finding century-old remains in good condition. But her private notes, discovered after her death in 2003, revealed observations that never made it into the public record. Chen had found a third skeleton deeper in the cave system. Adult male, showing signs of violent death from massive trauma consistent with animal attack. Scattered around this skeleton were artifacts that suggested the man had been carrying mining equipment and weapons when he died. More disturbing, Chen had documented evidence of ongoing habitation in the deeper caves. Fresh food remains, recently used fire pits, and sleeping areas that suggested something large had been using the cave system as shelter. The sleeping areas were positioned to watch multiple entrance points, as if whatever lived in the caves was guarding against intrusion. Chen's final note, written the day before she sealed her report, contained a single sentence: "Recommend immediate closure of site and reclassification as dangerous due to unstable wildlife habitat." She never explained what kind of wildlife required such precautions. The cave system was sealed with concrete barriers in April 1998. Official justification cited structural instability and potential hazards to recreational cavers. The Hartwell skeletons were buried in Burke County Cemetery under headstones paid for by the County Historical Society. But the concrete barriers didn't hold. Every October, when the first snow touches Widow's Crown's peak, children in Burke County report dreams of silver coins scattered across stone floors. Most wake from these dreams with nothing more than vague memories of cool air and distant voices. But a few wake with an irresistible urge to walk north toward the mountain, following paths they've never seen before. Local families have learned to watch for the signs. Children who stop eating, who stand at windows staring at the ridgeline, who speak of hearing scratching sounds in the walls. When these symptoms appear, parents quietly take their children on extended visits to relatives in other counties, waiting for whatever calls them to lose interest and turn elsewhere. The concrete barriers on Widow's Crown show fresh damage every spring, as if something massive periodically tests their strength. State maintenance crews replace the barriers without asking questions, adding wildlife deterrent measures that serve no purpose anyone can publicly explain. Burke County Sheriff's Department maintains a policy of investigating any missing children reports within 24 hours, regardless of circumstances. Deputies are trained to check Widow's Crown first, before expanding their search to other areas. They carry heavy-duty flashlights, emergency flares, and sidearms loaded with ammunition that seems excessive for routine search and rescue operations. The Hartwell family still lives in Burke County, though they've changed their name twice and moved to a different county seat. They still carry the ivory claw, passed down through bloodlines that remember promises made in mountain darkness. The current keeper, a high school teacher named David Hartford, monitors local children for signs of the calling while maintaining careful records of unexplained disappearances across 3 counties. His records show a disturbing pattern. The intervals between callings are getting shorter, and the children who answer them don't return even the partial freedom Samuel once enjoyed. Something in the deep places is growing hungry enough to break agreements that have lasted over a century. And winter nights in Burke County are getting longer every year. Subscribe if you want the next deep dive.